Hey guys, welcome to another episode of Legacy Speaks. I'm so excited because I have somebody near and dear to my heart here with me, Miss Shakisha Spencer. She's an LPC as well as a clinical supervisor here in Atlanta, and I'm just really excited to have her here. So welcome, Keisha.
Thank you. I'm excited.
Yay! And so the reason why I really want you to be able to talk to my viewers is because a lot of people have misconceptions about counseling, or they're seeing things from life coaches or just things on the internet that may or may not be true. And so you have your own private practice, and can you tell people about Grace Anthony Counseling and everything that you've done thus far?
Thank you for having me. Let's see. So Grace Anthony Counseling started about 2.5 years ago. I've been in private practice for, I don't know, several years, since about 2009, but I've been in the mental health field since 2001, so about 16 years. And I just decided it was time to kind of do my own thing. And so I started the practice kind of on a whim, and I was actually in Red Robin with my family, and I was like, ooh, I should start my own practice earlier. And my husband was like, why not? And we literally came up with the name Grace Anthony right there on the spot because they're named after my babies.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah,
and so with you being in the field for umpteenth amount of years, since 2001, like, what have you seen thus far? How have you seen the field transition over the course of your career?
Some of the things I feel like, especially here in Georgia, that have been very different. So when I started out, you didn't need a license. It was not a requirement. It was suggested. It was encouraged, but it wasn't a requirement like it is now. And so when I started out, I worked at a residential treatment facility, and we had 2 clinicians that we hired who'd been in the field like 20 years or so, and they didn't have a license and had no plan to get one.
Oh, wow.
It was so encouraged that the facility that I worked for were paying people $6,000 in bonuses if you got your full license. And so probably around 2006, 2007, that changed, and it became a requirement here in the state. So that's one of the biggest things that I've seen that has changed. Another huge thing that I've seen that's changed is more clinicians of color have started to join the practice, which is really awesome. And I've also seen the opposite, where it's more clients of color who are reaching out and seeking out mental health services, even if there isn't a major mental health issue that's going on. They've decided, you know what, I just need a really good tune-up. I just want to come and have somebody in my corner. I feel like counseling is a good idea because I've never tried it before, and nothing else is working, so why not?
And I think that's just amazing to be able to witness that growth. I remember when I went to the most recent American Counseling Association conference, and they were talking about how this field initially started off just focusing on the typical white male, a white American male, in terms of like job searching, career skills, career services, and now we're diving more in depth into the feelings and the emotions and the thoughts. And now a lot of people, with the surge on mental health and the focus on mental health within this country, I really do appreciate the fact that, especially living in Atlanta, you get to see a lot of people seeking out mental health services.
Yes, I'm excited about it. I love whenever I get Black males, so my practice is probably 99% African American. It wasn't by design, it just happened. But I have a lot of Black men that come in, and I always get excited because they're usually the population that doesn't come in as often. But I am seeing more women that are coming in, just people period, and seeking out services for their teenagers and being okay with making sure that their loved ones are okay, and supporting that, and inviting their friends and inviting family to come in for family sessions. So it's really nice to see, I guess, the nation's narrative around mental health change in a positive direction.
Awesome. So obviously when we're working in the field, a lot of people ask you, what is your ideal client, or what is your ideal population that you enjoy working with? Everybody knows I love the psychotics. But what is your ideal client, or who is your ideal client?
So it's kind of evolved over the years, right? So I used to work a lot with adolescents. I did a lot with the borderline personality disorder population, got into DBT. So I am a DBT informed clinician. I also practice cognitive behavioral therapy. So that's kind of where I was for a long time, but I also worked a lot with trauma clients, and it's kind of evolved over the years. So my ideal client at this point is men and women of trauma. I specialize in particularly men and women of color who have dealt with childhood trauma. But I don't know if this is a specialization or more of a something I've just kind of found out or figured out over the years, but I work really well with people who didn't realize that they had trauma at any point of their life, and coming to that realization. So that's been something that's kind of turned into my ideal client over the years.
I just want to reiterate that trauma is something that negatively impacts a person's functionality. It can range from sexual trauma or abandonment or PTSD, whether it's in war or whatever the case may be. I know a lot of times they hear trauma, it's just like, oh, a veteran. It's just like, no.
Not necessarily.
Yeah.
Actually, I see some veterans, and I have in the past, but I don't see as much. A lot of times, it's issues such as domestic violence. I've had clients who have come because of childhood sexual trauma, or even molestation that they didn't realize, and they didn't connect that this was an actual trauma, or just really neglectful and abusive homes and childhoods that they didn't realize that was the situation. Sometimes even as simple as I'm in an abusive work environment currently, and that can create a traumatic environment for them. So what I have also seen recently is an uptick in clients coming in because of the recent political climate and everything kind of going on with the Senate confirmations, and how the Me Too movement has been an ongoing trigger for folks who have put things in the past, have kind of done their own work or avoided it in a really unhealthy but good for them kind of way. And so now they're coming back in and saying, I've been re-triggered constantly because of what's in the news.
Right. And I had talked about that in a previous video before, how like oftentimes we have this sensory overload from the media or social media or just conversations that we have on our day-to-day basis, and most of the time it's through vicarious trauma. It's through the stuff that we're like viewing or are being exposed to. And so how do you deal with that effectively as a counselor?
So part of it is helping clients recognize what trauma is, what it really looks like, and helping to normalize that for them. And some of it is helping them identify what their triggers are. Most people don't realize that what they think are simple, non-sequential things are actually trauma triggers. So it could be something as simple as recognizing a smell that takes you back, or something that you see, or a feeling that you get, sensations in your body. So doing some of that work about self-realization can be really, really helpful, I feel like.
So I wanted to run it back a little bit. You mentioned DBT. Can you explain to the people what DBT is?
So a super simple explanation that I usually give folks. So cognitive behavioral therapy is your thoughts are connected to how you feel, and how you feel is connected to what you do. And so DBT is really helpful in that one part of your mind is very rational, very logical, maybe even a little black and white thinking. Another part of your mind is very emotional, which most of us make decisions and say things and do things based off how we feel most of the time. What we teach you how to do is use what's called your wise mind. So it's a great balance between that rational and emotional part of you. So you're not too far to the left or too far to the right. So whenever you're feeling like your feelings are just unbalanced or unregulated, it can be really helpful skills that can help you have a greater self-awareness, which is a huge part of dialectical behavior therapy. Also, when your feelings are like at a 12, being able to have really good skills to kind of work through that so you can problem solve in the end, and then having better interpersonal relationships with other people. If you are aware of your feelings, your thoughts, your triggers, it can help you build positive communication and relationships with other people. It's my favorite.
And oftentimes too, as therapists, we tend to pair different school of thought. I know you mentioned DBT and CBT, but are there other schools of thoughts that you kind of lean on as well?
I think over the years, I haven't really pointed out, yes, I like this, yes, I like that. I do a lot of choice theory. I do a lot of solution focused, a lot of positive psychology. So there are multiple, I feel like over the years, different schools of thought that I've pulled from. I am primarily grounded in CBT and DBT. However, I feel like whatever the client needs in that moment is what I really pull from.
Yeah.
So I think most clinicians evolve to become more eclectic over the years, but we can always have that grounding of where we came from.
Right, very true. With you evolving with Grace Anthony Counseling, what are some things that you have noticed as a business owner and counselor, how do you even manage that role, or those two roles at the same time? Because it's hard enough to be a counselor. And now you're a full-blown entrepreneur, and so how do you manage the two roles, and what are some things that you've learned over the course of being an entrepreneur?
So I agree with you. It is really, really hard. Gonna sugarcoat that. What I did was I started out small. So I went into private practice, and honestly, I had a couple of jobs. I was at 2 different private practices and the crisis and access line here. And I was working all 3 of those at the same time. And then I realized you're burning yourself out. So I stuck to a really good friend of mine. I worked in her private practice for several years. When I started mine, I just started on 2 days a week, something simple. I was here, I think, every Friday and Saturday, and kind of built from there. The biggest thing I've learned is to figure out what you want to start with, as far as like getting systems in place, and kind of start with those and don't waver. For instance, I wish I would have started with an electronic health record system and not have paper charts at all. That is the absolute biggest regret. If you choose to either do self-pay or do insurance, make that choice kind of early on and kind of stick to whatever that plan is. So right now I'm a little bit of both and working to come off some of the panels. I wonder what it would have been like if I would have just did self-pay only. Or if I had only been a insurance provider. Do you know what I mean? So kind of making those decisions. Putting really good systems in place. So initially I was doing all of the billing. I was doing all of the explanation of benefits. I was reconciling everything. I was an army of one. And I had really good support. But I had an accountability partner who was super, super helpful for me, and we kind of held each other accountable, and we'd meet at least once a month to kind of talk about our woes and how do we work stuff out. So it was a lot. But I was determined to at least have my version of success come to fruition, so I'm excited about that. But it was hard, and not to mention the fact that I'm a mommy and a wife and a daughter, you know what I mean? And so it's a balance. It can be done. It all depends on how determined you are and how committed you are to this process.
Right. And with that being said, because I'm really appreciative of you sharing your journey overall, because I was thinking about today, I was like, wow, counselors need support too.
Absolutely.
And oftentimes we kind of live in this cliche of just like, you know, you're the helper, you're carrying this load of not only your personal life, but your career and things of that nature. And a lot of times I hear, well, that's your job. You're in the helping profession. That's what you're supposed to do. But we need self-care as well.
All day, every day. A big thing for me, I think, when I started, there are a lot of like counseling and or supportive counseling spaces on social media. So I'm in several Facebook groups that are helpful. I didn't know any of that when I started out. It would have been so nice. A lot of them weren't around, but it would have been really nice to have those, to be able to ask people questions. So I was able to join a lot of those and get a lot of validation, and also get a lot of direction that I didn't have before. And through that, I started kind of my own Facebook group of clinicians called the Circle Atlanta. It's primarily for clinicians of color to get support and to consult and to network and just have our own space, and that's been really helpful. So we meet about once a month to be able to support each other. I felt like it would be really nice to take these Facebook groups offline and be able to talk about some really cool stuff.
Right, and real life connections, because I know when I had my internship and we did clinical supervision as a group, that was extremely helpful to know that I wasn't in this alone. Like, granted, we were at different sites as students, to know that, oh, your client did this, well, my client did this too, and what interventions can I use, and, you know, bouncing off those ideas and stuff like that. And so I really appreciate your group as well, because I'm like, this is awesome. And I'm in there as a new clinician with my notebook, and I'm
and we encourage that. I love that I have new clinicians in there, because even though I've been in the field a long time, you know, I still learn from everybody. There's certain folks in the circle that I'm always excited when they show up, and I'm like, oh, I'm about to get my whole life today. So I'm excited about it. I love it.
And for clinicians who don't have that support group, what advice can you give to them? I know, especially in areas that are like extremely rural, or they don't live in meccas like Atlanta or whatever the case may be, how can people establish those I guess, one-on-one connections to make sure that they're not sinking in their own ship?
Well, part of it is recognizing your own circle. So a lot of us have colleagues out of grad school. We have colleagues that we have connected with through different workspaces. So being able to connect with them, start inviting folks out. I'm having a dinner and I really want, or come meet me at such and such restaurant to be able to talk about what's going on, or everybody kind of gather at my office once a month or once a week or whatever. Start your own spaces if you feel like that there isn't anything out there for you. Because that's essentially what I did. It was nice, again, to have everything online, but there are certain things we can't discuss online, and we need to be able to do case consultations or talk about some really tough stuff. So and everybody also doesn't want to put all their business out online either. And so you have this level of self-disclosure that most folks don't get 100% if you are in an online space. Whereas if I'm face to face with you and I have that literal connection, it's a little easier to talk.
Yeah, and I completely understand, because we're living under like these guidelines, whether you subscribe to ACA or licensed marriage family therapy or couples and family, whatever the case may be. We as clinicians have guidelines that we have to live by or work by, and so sometimes we feel like, well, I can't do this, or maybe I can't talk about this because of HIPAA violation or whatever. And so it's really good to be able to connect to other people who may know about resources, what you can or cannot do, whether you're young in the field or old in the field. You can continue to learn all the time, and I think that's just, I really do appreciate your group.
Thank
you.
It's
just like it's fun. As a new clinician who's always excited to learn, and you are a clinical supervisor. As a matter of fact, guys, she's my clinical supervisor. She don't got time, so don't be Googling her. Don't be Googling her, because she got a caseload already. Okay? So, but as a clinical supervisor, what advice can you give to new clinicians, people who have just recently graduated and trying to get their feet wet in the actual industry?
So one of the biggest things that I can say is to find a really good clinical supervisor and mentors. Find somebody who's going to take a really good interest in you, that will be able to walk with you throughout your career. I mean, you are our colleagues. That's kind of what we're training you to do. And so it'll be nice, like once you get your full license and you decide to open your practice, and you have this whole group of people who've been with your whole walk that can kind of refer to you and support you and all that kind of stuff. So having a mentor and having a clinical supervisor, I feel like is imperative. The other thing I would say is continue to get as many trainings under your belt as you possibly can. Having this niche idea was not an idea when I was coming up, essentially, when I was first starting out. Nobody was really talking about that. A lot of people were generalists, unless you just had a really strong interest in a particular therapeutic modality. But I wish I would have been able to have somebody that could help me niche down, if that was even a thought, because it helps kind of steer you a little bit. And then get trainings in a wide range of areas, because you don't know, things change. Again, when I started out, I was doing a lot of trauma work, but it was exclusively with high-risk teenagers. I still see teenagers, but they're not as high risk anymore, and I don't do as much crisis work as I was doing before, and so things kind of change a little bit. Yeah.
And I'm glad that you pointed that out, because I know when I was in school, I was just like, I'm Lyrian at heart. And then you kind of like start working with different populations, whether it's in a hospital setting or community or whatever the case may be. Like you stated before, it's important to make sure that you're applying the right modality to the patient, because they may not respond to that. They may not want to focus on their past traumas. They want you to focus on the right here and the right now.
Absolutely. And sometimes when you're working with clients, you get to a place where you kind of hit that sweet spot where you're not really thinking about modality at all. It's all about like your connection with the client, and you might not even be able to say, oh, that was solution focused, or that was DBT work that I did, because sometimes it all starts to meld together. And so you're just working with the client, and whatever is working well, whatever you're doing well, you don't really care anymore. You just want to make sure that they're getting the help that they need. I don't know, maybe just if you are in the field, don't give up. Like, it can be extremely rewarding. It is difficult at times. It can be challenging. The one thing I would say is I am a believer that every clinician should have their own clinician. That's probably the one thing that I would say. I think it's helpful that you have gone or continue to go through the therapeutic process yourself and learn how to be on the other side of the couch, because this work can be really hard. And sometimes we focus so much on the work that we forget that we are real people and have our own lives. Recently somebody asked me, do you go to therapy? And I was like, absolutely. And she was like, well, probably because your clients are like, they have all this stuff going on. And I said, I don't talk about them.
Seriously.
At all. I have a real life happening. You know what I mean? And so I want to make sure that I am as healthy as I can be, so that I am pouring not from an empty cup.
Yes, that is beautiful. I was like, oh, like a little sage.
That's right.
But it really is important, because I know when I was going through my training in school, and they were like, oh, you make sure you get a counselor. That's what they said, that you need to be able to know how it is on the other side. And I was just like, oh, okay, you know, whatever. Until one day countertransference hit me. And I was like,
Oh my God.
Exactly. But it was just an eye-opening experience, because it was just things that I didn't know, well, things that I thought that I had handled and suppressed and pushed down and whatnot, but I think kept rearing its ugly head.
Absolutely. And it does.
Yeah,
it does. But I would say even for seasoned clinicians, you know what I mean? Every clinician that I personally know goes to therapy. So it may not be a weekly situation. It may be once a month check-ins because they're in a good space right now. Something may have happened, and so they're back in on a regular basis. But whatever you choose to do, I absolutely encourage you, no matter what stage of this therapeutic streets that you're in, that you would consider it and follow through with it, because it's really helpful.
And do you have any advice for seasoned clinicians as well, outside of obtaining a counselor?
I always encourage seasoned clinicians, if you're open to it, to become a clinical supervisor, because we remember when, at least we should. Yeah. I remember having folks pour into me. I remember folks making sure that I was good. I remember being eager and like soaking up as much as I possibly could. And people taking time out to make sure that I was molded into a really solid clinical provider. And so if clinical supervision isn't your passion, maybe mentoring is. And so taking some new clinicians under your wing, I always think it's helpful to kind of reach back and pull others up.
How can people find you?
Yes, so Grace Anthony Counseling is, of course, in Atlanta, Georgia. We're right off of Cascade Road. You can always find us at graceanthonycounseling.com. We are also on Instagram, Grace Anthony Counseling. We're also on Facebook and Twitter, same name. And I see a wide range of, I guess, mental health challenges, and even just life adjustments. Sometimes we just need to come in, like folks like me and you, we just need to talk to somebody. And so I work with a whole bunch of stuff. Whatever you need.
And guys, I'll definitely include all of her information in the description box below. Don't forget to follow her on Instagram. She is amazing. And if you're in Atlanta, please stop by in her nearest gathering of The Circle. I'll also provide a link to that as well. That way you can join the Facebook group if you're a clinician. Sorry, clinicians only. Clinicians of color, sorry. Not sorry. Please be sure to like, comment, subscribe, and share. And don't forget to stay connected via Legacy SBKS on everything. Until next time.